Thanks, Kim. My name's Richard Martin and I'm also an anthropologist at the University of Queensland, and I just wanted to make three sort of quick points about, from a university perspective at the end of the day today. One is that at UQ, and I'm sure at other places, there's a big focus on indigenising the curriculum, and we actually have a graduate attribute which is something like an appreciation of Indigenous culture, which is an expectation for everybody who graduates from the university, that, you know, if you graduate as an engineer or a development practitioner, whatever, you have an appreciation of Indigenous culture. So there's a lot of initiative happening in that space, and there's a lot of wonderful things happening. And I guess the point I make is that a lot of that is happening somewhat separately to anthropology, and in some respects, you know, when we hear people talking about culture, you know, it's sometimes in tension with how we might think about culture, the culture concept from an anthropological point of view. But you know, there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of opportunity, and there's a big challenge in the university sector, I think, because as a society there's a lot more consideration of these issues, and there's a hunger, I think, for greater engagement with the complexity that people perceive in this space and other spaces. So a lot of that is happening somewhat separately to anthropology, but as Kim's indicated, it's not doom and gloom. You know, I think in one of our first year courses we have 450 students, so we're getting some good numbers. You know, a lot of the talk is about numbers. If we have less than 20, 25 students, we're under a lot of pressure. And so specialised courses, and we have several of them. We have two focused on Indigenous Australia, are hard to sustain in that environment because, you know, you need to bring in students. But we do our best, and I think we have a native title course, which is not called native title, it's called sort of working with Indigenous rights. And we get something like 50 students year on year, so it's a relatively strong course, and they read a judgment and provide a kind of anthropological review and perspective on that judgment. And we do get, you know, small numbers, but consistently in a group of 50 students we'll have 3 or 4 or 5 Indigenous students who bring their own experience and perspective to that. And I guess just to conclude, the third point I wanted to make is that young people, I think, more than ever are hungry for a career, and they're concerned about work, and they want meaningful work, and work that makes a difference. And sometimes, you know, we all know that work in this space is like that, but sometimes people can find it hard to see the future for themselves, or to perceive themselves in a job in this kind of area, and they're not insensitive to the political tensions and the moral hazard and the anxiety that has been discussed. And I guess just I listened with a lot of interest to Dirima's presentation, because I found that the concept of positionality is helpful for young people to think, well, you know, how am I going to do this? Am I going to be an advocate, or am I going to be you know, an anthropologist or an archaeologist? What's my positionality? What's going to work for me? And field work is helpful. Mentoring, I think, you know, apprenticeships, time in the bush, or in the complexity of real social situations, where it's not enough to say, you know, it always was and always will be Indigenous land. There needs to be a greater engagement with the complexity of colonial history and intra-Indigenous politics and the work of rights. And I think we all know that the work of rights is complex, and as a colleague of mine puts it, we need people who are prepared to toil in that complexity, and to prepare young people for that. As Kim said, you know, they need to experience something of that complexity in the classroom, and then they're ready to go. I mean, they're excited about it. They want to be in roles, I think. So that's my perspective.